Snow drifted down in lazy flakes across the empty plains of Wyoming, the kind of snow that whispered secrets as it fell, covering every scar of the land with a fragile white peace. Inside the small church on the edge of town, the faint smell of pine wood and lamp oil filled the air. The benches were empty now, the vows long over, the crowd already gone home, murmuring behind gloved hands about the strangest wedding they'd seen in years. At the altar, Mary Ellen James stood alone. She was a heavy-set woman in her late 20s, her pale hands nervously, clutching a small bouquet of wildflowers that had begun to wilt in the cold air. Her dress was simple, homespun cotton, cream-colored, with a patch at the hem she'd sewn herself. Her cheeks were red from both the chill and the sting of embarrassment. The man she'd been promised to, a store clerk named Thomas Miller, had ridden out of town that morning, leaving behind nothing but a note that said, "I can't do it. I can't marry a woman like you." That note lay torn in Mary Ellen's pocket now. She hadn't cried much. She was used to the quiet ache of being overlooked. The whispers had followed her all her life. She's too big. She's not what men want. Pretty face. Shame about the rest. They said she was kind. A good cook, reliable, even gentle. But none of those words could warm a bed or fill the hollow spot beside her heart where love should have lived. She'd stayed because of her cooking job at the boarding house, feeding men who barely looked at her except to ask for more stew. The church door creaked open. She turned and froze. Standing there in the doorway, brushing snow from his broad shoulders, was Samuel Reed, the richest rancher in the county, and the last man she expected to see. He was tall and square-jawed, his eyes the color of storm clouds before rain, his coat dusted white from the cold. People said Samuel Reed could buy anything in town if he wanted to. But the truth was he had no one. His wife had died 3 winters ago, giving birth to a stillborn child. Since then he'd buried himself in work, in cattle drives and contracts, in silence. Mary Ellen lowered her gaze, ashamed to be seen in her wedding dress by a man like him. "Mr. Reed," she whispered, "you shouldn't have come." "I heard what happened," he said simply, his voice low and rough like a man unused to talking much. "Figured you might not want to be alone?" Her throat tightened. "It's kind of you, sir, but I'm fine. Folks like me get used to disappointment." She tried to smile, but her lip trembled. "No one marries a fat girl, sir. But I can cook." Samuel didn't move for a moment. The wind howled behind him, and he stepped forward, shutting the door softly. "That's a cruel thing to say about yourself," he said. "Crueler still that the town made you believe it." Mary Ellen shook her head. "It's the truth. Men want women who look good on their arm, not someone who makes biscuits and stew." He took another step closer, his boots creaking against the old church floor. "Men who think that way don't deserve you." She looked up, startled by the weight in his words. Samuel's eyes weren't mocking or pitying, they were steady, searching. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. "I could use someone like you at the ranch," he said finally. "Cook's been gone a month, and the men are living off canned beans and burnt coffee. I can't promise you much, but you'll have food, a warm place to sleep, and decent pay." Mary Ellen hesitated. "You don't have to offer me charity, Mr. Reed." He shook his head. "It's not charity. It's respect. You have a gift, and I need that more than I care to admit." Something in her chest fluttered, a fragile, hopeful thing she hadn't felt in years. The humiliation of the morning still stung, but there was something about Samuel Reed's voice that made her believe he wasn't lying. By sundown, she was in his wagon, her few belongings packed neatly in a basket beside her. The trail to his ranch was long and cold, but Samuel kept the horses steady, glancing at her every so often as though making sure she was all right. They didn't talk much, just the sound of hooves crunching through snow, the jingle of harness chains, and the soft whistle of the wind. Yet even in silence, something unspoken grew between them. When they reached the Reed Ranch, the sight took her breath away. The house stood like a fortress against the cold, logs stacked thick and high, golden light spilling from the windows. Inside it was warm, filled with the scent of cedar smoke and old memories. A picture of his late wife hung on the wall above the mantel, a reminder of love lost and promises broken by fate. Mary Ellen lowered her eyes, feeling suddenly like an intruder in a story that wasn't hers. Samuel showed her the kitchen, large but lifeless, with dusty shelves and cold stoves. "You can make it your own," he said quietly. "This house could use the Sound of a woman's hands working. Again, she nodded, running her fingers along the worn wood of the counter. Then I'll start at dawn. He smiled faintly. You don't waste time. No, sir. I've already wasted enough of it dreaming. That night, as the snow thickened outside, Mary Ellen lay awake in the small guest room, staring at the ceiling. The wind moaned like a lonely spirit, and she thought of the church, the vows that never were, and the man who'd left her behind. But for the first time, she didn't cry, because another man, a quiet, grieving rancher, had looked at her not as a failure, but as someone worth saving. Morning light spilled through the frost-covered window, turning the kitchen into a canvas of gold and white. Mary Ellen woke before dawn, her breath forming little clouds in the cold air as she tied her apron around her waist. The stove was old and stubborn, but she coaxed it to life with kindling and patience. Soon the ranch filled with the smell of biscuits, bacon, and coffee. Real coffee. Not the burned sludge the cowhands had grown used to. When Samuel walked in, his boots dusted with snow, he paused in the doorway. The room was alive again. The laughter, the clatter of plates, the warmth of good food. It had been years since his house had felt this full. He smiled, watching her move about the kitchen, her cheeks flushed from the heat. You've turned this place into something alive again, he said later. She smiled faintly. It's just food, sir. No, he replied. It's heart. But as warmth filled the ranch, the cold outside began to whisper again. Gossip, carried by tongues that never stopped wagging. Some said she'd trapped him with pity. Others said she didn't belong. One afternoon she overheard two ranch hands laughing, saying no man would ever marry a woman like her unless he was blind or desperate. That night she sat by the window. Tears she swore she'd never cry again, tracing silent paths down her face. When Samuel came in, he found her there, her eyes red and distant. She tried to hide her pain, but he saw through it. They're right, you know, she said quietly. You only hired me out of pity. I don't belong here, Samuel removed his gloves and looked at her with a steadiness that silenced the storm outside. Mary Ellen, he said, I didn't bring you here out of pity. I brought you here because you're the only person who's made this place feel alive again. You gave these men a reason to come home hungry. You gave me a reason to wake up to something other than silence. She looked at him through tears. But they say no one marries a fat girl, sir. He took a deep breath. Then they're fools. Because the way I see it, a woman who can turn grief into grace, hunger into comfort, and a house into a home is worth more than gold. Beauty fades. Kindness doesn't. You feed souls, Mary Ellen, not just stomachs. He stepped closer, his voice softer now. You said no one marries a fat girl, but I can cook. Maybe it's time someone proved the world wrong. I don't want to cook anymore. I want a partner. I don't need someone to serve me. I need someone to stand beside me. Tears fell freely down her face as he took her hand gently. Say yes, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt your worth again. And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet glow of the fire, Mary Ellen's broken heart began to heal. The woman who had been left at the altar found a home, not in wealth or beauty, but in the soul of a man who finally saw her. The snow outside slowed, the stars came out, and for the first time in a long time, hope lived in that lonely Wyoming house again. They stood together at the window, hands entwined, watching the night sky clear. Samuel whispered, Let the world talk. You and I, we'll build something worth talking about. She smiled through tears. Then let's start with breakfast tomorrow, he chuckled. Only if you let me help this time. Not a chance, she said, laughing softly. And the house echoed with warmth, laughter, and love, the kind that doesn't fade with time. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful, emotional Western love stories filled with courage, heartbreak, and redemption. Every week we share stories that remind you, love isn't about perfection. It's about seeing the beauty that others overlook. So saddle up, hit that subscribe button, and ride with us for more tales that heal the heart and stir the soul.